สวัสดีค่ะ Good morning and welcome to our real-time live streaming interview sessions here as part of the 19th Bangkok International Symposium on HIV medicine. I'm with you once again. I'm Pachari Raksawong. Today is the third and final day. A lot happening. Wrapping up just now was a session on translating research into practice and policy. The moderator of that session is sitting right next to me here, welcoming once again Professor Praphan Phanuphak, Director of the Thai Red Cross AIDS Research Center. สวัสดีค่ะ
Good morning, everyone. This is the second time that I have seen all of you here on television. So we just finished our symposium. We would like to ask our first speaker, Professor Anthony Kelleher from Kirby Institute in Sydney, to join us this expert interview here.
Thank you, Praphan. Good morning.
You mentioned about the discovery and being used in either laboratories and clinics here. Usually, this kind of invention costs a lot.
Yes.
And the products that come out, either the diagnostic tests or medications are very expensive. How can we minimize this problem so that you still can allow research, innovation, and at the same time the products can reach the end users faster and more effectively?
So that's a very difficult question,
Yes,
Praphan, and I'm not surprised you ask me difficult questions. But I think there are two ways to approach that. I think one, that when these things are being developed, certainly, particularly in terms of diagnostic tests, then ways of simplifying the test and making it easily accessible during the developmental process. You can incorporate those things. As I was saying in my talk, the simpler the answer, the more likely it is to translate. And if you can make your tests simpler and simpler, and then you're more likely to make them cheaper as well. And so one way is to think about that during the developmental process and have that as one of your aims. And I guess that's probably easier for academic research than for commercial research. The other way is to have differential pricing, I guess, where you get the people that can pay to pay a higher cost for the test, and that subsidizes the cost of the test or the drug in less resourced countries and environments.
Yeah, usually the new products, it's mostly will be better than the older products, right? Usually, but I mean, again, things can be repurposed as well. And I think David Cooper talked very much about, the strategic research, and the demonstration of those trials was that wasn't dependent on a particular drug, but a particular strategy of using those drugs. So my question is, when the new product is usually better than the older ones, can, for example, the new product which is better, reduce their own price so that all the other older products will then be killed, KILLED, so that
yes.
Everyone will enjoy the newer products because in larger sale.
That's another strategy, I guess, that you undermine the market of the competitors by competitive pricing. But I guess then you need to be sure that your market is going to be large enough so that your marginal cost makes your expenses recoverable.
Tony, my last question is, what would you tell us in terms of the classical academic researchers, not working for the companies or whatever, how should they frame their research in order to fulfill the future use, the application of their own research in the university, and how can do it?
Well, so I think there's two parts of that. One, there is discovery for discovery's sake, and that's very important because you're never sure how those discoveries might be used. The discovery of retroviruses in animals clearly advanced our understanding of HIV rapidly. So that sort of research is very important. But when you think that you have something that actually has a diagnostic or therapeutic outcome, then I think you need to think about where the market for that is, and then really from very early on in the development, make sure that you're developing the assay or the drug so that it will be accessible to that market.
Right. Now, research is extremely important because hopefully with research we get more successful, and we're taking a step forward each time to finally coming up with a cure. What are some challenges or some obstacles that we have to overcome to quicken things?
Well, so I think cure is an aspirational goal, I think, and the biology of HIV is such that it's integrated into our genome. We have to find ways of basically getting a piece of genetic material out of that genome in every cell that contains that virus, and so that's a huge challenge. And so a very detailed understanding of, we're either going to need a very detailed understanding of that biology with a lot more basic research, or we're going to have to strike it lucky and have a serendipitous discovery where something works when we didn't necessarily expect that it would. So, the challenges are profound for cure.
All right.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tony.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
Professor Anthony
very much.
Kelleher. And we are still going to continue with this topic, translating research into practice and policy. We are now going to bring on our next guest. Now, he is Professor Frank Cobelens, the Academic Medical Center and Amsterdam Institute, a representative from there of the Global Health and Development.
Welcome.
Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Good morning to you, Professor Frank.
Thank you.
Welcome to our interview session here. Now, you just came from the conference room and you were sharing your presentations with the audience. Can you give us an overview here on what was delivered by you inside the conference room?
Well, so my background's in tuberculosis, and I used the basically examples from the tuberculosis field with regard to how research is being translated into policy, and I distinguished two sort of major areas. One is more on operations research linked to implementation of disease control activities at the sort of grassroots level, and the other one was more about global policy and how does that translate into new interventions being implemented and picked up. And the main message for the first part was that it is for that setting very important to engage from the very beginning policymakers in the process, make sure that there is a research agenda at national, sometimes even local level, that speaks to the needs with regard to tuberculosis control, and to make sure that there is direct dissemination to policymakers. Policymakers are basically involved in each and every step of the research process. With regard to global level or global recommendations, it was much more about how can we come from guidelines, global recommendations that are based on clinical trials, for example, how can we go to implementation in countries, which requires much more evidence and a much broader set of evidence than just evidence about efficacy of a drug or accuracy of a new diagnostic. And so you need to know much more about applicability, feasibility, acceptability, whether it actually meets the needs of patients and clinicians in those settings. And that's always an issue in tuberculosis, whether it is cost effective and affordable.
During your talk, you mentioned about a very good, effective instrument. Okay, the gene expert that can diagnose the TB bugs and also the resistance of that drug resistant to the drugs. But it has not been well used to the full capacity. How can we suggest to the country or the public health officer how to use that more effectively?
Well, I think indeed that gene expert is not, at least not yet, living up to its promise, because of the much higher sensitivity. I haven't even discussed the issues around drug resistance, but just looking at its ability to diagnose TB patients with a much higher sensitivity and much quicker than what we had until now. And I think it doesn't live up to its promise, because it actually, if you want to use such a technology to its full promise, you have to use it at the level where patients are, which is often in community clinics. If you wait until they've been referred, where usually the machine is sitting, then there is hardly any benefit in that respect. And I think that is what we're seeing. And I think also we need more research and probably also more discovery to use these kind of technologies in that sense in a more effective way.
At the same time, the test is also expensive. And then you said if we put that in the community level, which is closer to the patient that to be used, that's true. Then you must need many more, a lot of machines throughout the country, for example.
Yeah. So well, I think, and that's more, I think, also a question of research and development. I think there are two sort of possible solutions. One is to come up with a true point-of-care test, which I think is a long shot in tuberculosis. And I think many test developers are working on it, but it seems not to be very easy. So in the end, you want the sort of $1 test that can be used at the bedside. But I think as long as we don't have that, what will probably help is what I call a triage test. I'll be talking about that tomorrow in the afternoon also a little bit, which would give you at least a sort of stratification for the patient. So whether the patient has a high probability that he or she actually has tuberculosis. So that should be a simple test, cheap test that not necessarily makes a diagnosis, but helps you to sort of improve the diagnostic pathway, if you will. So actually tell you this is a patient with a high likelihood that he has TB. So let's send the sputum of that patient for gene expert testing, for example.
So simplification is extremely key, isn't it, to keep
Absolutely.
costs down, as well as our earlier guest mentioned, Professor Anthony.
Yeah. Okay. My other question is, you talk about it in terms of how to convince the policy makers to use the best use of research finding. What is the most important things here that the policy makers, decision makers need to know in order to support a good research findings? You can say one or two.
Well, I think there is. I mean, there's something. Well, that's true in tuberculosis, but it's true in most diseases. In the end, what is decisive is the cost implications, and I think we are underestimating this issue. That in the end, cost effectiveness and affordability are major drivers of the decision to scale up a new technology. So that's a plea for much more involving health economists and economists in those kind of evaluations.
That's very good suggestions. So every trial we have to try to put some cost effectiveness analysis in most of those studies, if possible, in order to be.
Yes, I think that would really help. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us there. Also highlighted what he talked about inside the conference room there. Two key areas: operations research, making sure that it reaches out to the grassroots level as well. And also another key point that he's just made is that it's important to engage policymakers. And when you engage policymakers, affordability, this is also an important aspect of it all, cost effectiveness. The other key area that Professor Frank brought up during his talk was global policy. And now this is also important as you do want to implement research and have it effective in various countries as well. We thank you very much for your time, and we also look forward to your talk. You're a specialist focusing on TB, tuberculosis, so you'll be talking later at 1, so you've still got time. At 1, he will be addressing ending TB, giving you the global perspective of things. Frank Cobelens from the Academic Medical Center and Amsterdam Institute of Global Health and Development. We thank you.
Thank you.
ขอบคุณค่ะ ขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you.
We have one more guest who is going to make his way here to the hot seat over here and tell us more. regarding the latest advances, etc. We're focusing on research, translating that into practice as well as policy. Let's bring up here Professor David Cooper, the director of the Kirby Institute for Infection and Immunity in Society at the University of New South Wales, Australia. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi. I'm going to be playing timekeeper, and Professor Praphan, you will be posing Professor David here with a question. So,
Okay, thank you very much, David, for your talk in the room there. I think I would like you to, Professor David Cooper has been in HIV care and research for the last 30 years, more than that year. I would like you to tell the audience at home here that what kind of changes that we have seen during the last 30 years of work on HIV and AIDS. The major success that you think that we should all be proud of.
Well, I think the major success is, of course, antiretroviral therapy. From a disease that was almost uniformly fatal, where I recall that I had a ward full of patients in the 1980s and early 1990s who were all sick and dying. When I first came to Thailand, you had the same issue. And there was nothing we could do for them apart from give them drugs for opportunistic infections, and sometimes a person came in with pneumocystis pneumonia and you got them better with cotrimoxazole, they had a honeymoon period, and then of course they got sick again. And it wasn't until antiretroviral therapy came along that this made a difference. So I don't think there's been any intervention in modern medicine that has been so successful in such a short period of time, from the discovery of the virus to implementation. It is, I think, a modern medical miracle.
You're right. So besides the effective medication, the price of medication is also much cheaper nowadays, so that more than 17 million people throughout the world can receive the medications now.
Right.
However, in order to get person to come to receive the drugs, they need to know that they are HIV positive.
Right.
What is your suggestion or advice to our audience here? How to get more people come for HIV testing or in the HIV status so that they can benefit from the powerful medications?
So I think we have to test more people. So originally HIV testing was full of problems, right? Because if you had an HIV test, there was in the first days, there were, if you were HIV positive, there was nothing you could do about it, right? So it wasn't really, you could understand the community viewpoint. There wasn't actually worth knowing, right? And so the mystique of testing sort of grew around that, of voluntary counselling and testing and so on, and it was almost a bit of an industry about doing that. I think that the thing has changed now. People with HIV are all recommended to have treatment. I think we have to normalise it. We have to make it normal and as part of normal medical practice. So everyone should have an HIV test at some stage in their lives, right? Everyone who's at risk of HIV should have regular HIV tests. And we've just got to normalise it and say that this is what everyone does, right? And I think we have to have young role models for this. Right? So, for example, I was very impressed at the World AIDS Conference in Durban, where sort of Elton John handed over the reins to Prince Harry, right? So Prince Harry, a young person, very famous, very admired by young people, takes an HIV test, right? We have to normalise this and make everybody aware that everybody should be tested, both for their own health and for the benefit of their partners and communities. And of course in Thailand there's very strong community goodwill, right? So I think of all places, Thailand should be a place where people undergo testing.
Okay.
I think in terms of discrimination and stigmatization, that's still a big challenge that here in Thailand we have to overcome. Isn't that right, Professor Praphan?
Yes, it
Urging
is,
people,
yeah.
high-risk people to go in and get tested. I mean, there are facilities and there are civil society, NGOs going out to help, but still this is a main obstacle.
Yeah, this is the most difficult thing to solve.
So I especially didn't mention stigma and discrimination because I think the medical system or the health system, right? The health system has to normalise, right?
Okay,
and
yes,
once the health system normalises, I think that can be a major component of reducing stigma and discrimination, right? It won't be the total answer, I agree, but we have to get our act together as well.
Right, and I think the mass media has a very, very important role to play as well. Like you said, Prince Harry and Elton John there. Perhaps we can find some local celebrities and stars
like
to
you,
shine to shine a spotlight on this issue, so people are aware, educated, and up to date with the latest, and that they are in the know that there is ART and there's same-day ART as well, and that they can actually live a normal life and reduce that stigmatization. I think it takes a lot of work from all sides of mass media. Parents have to play an extremely important role as well, because here, having sex, it's behind closed doors, isn't it, Professor? This is the Thai context of things. But I believe it's more open in Australia, isn't it?
Look, I think, sex is part of people's normal lives. I think we've just got to get over it. People have sex, whether you're gay or straight or whatever you are, or transgender, and let's just normalise it and be happy with our sex lives and get on with it.
Right.
Let's get it more out in the open.
Right.
And I suppose Australian society is certainly, in some parts of Australian society, we're better at it than other countries.
So that is possibly for the Thai context. We might want to bring somebody up here to discuss that and how we can, the different channels in normalising it, in the words of Professor David Cooper. We thank you, Professor David Cooper, for taking the time to share with us your perspective on matters here. Thank you very much. Now, Professor Praphan, don't leave just yet. We have about 2 to 3 more minutes to wrap up this session, so you get to continue to stay, and we'll have you wrap things up and say some concluding words regarding translating research into practice and policy.
Yes, I think research needs to be done because for the advancement of either science or the benefit of the people in general. However, in order to even to plan any research to plan the research in advance, they need to think about who will use the result of the research, how to convince all the stakeholders in order to, especially how to convince the government, who is the final players, the main players in terms of financing all the activities. So we need to think around and then just try to make the research findings practicable, being used, and if we know something that can further improve our initial research findings, we should continue doing it, so-called implementation of research, so that everyone will benefit from the research results.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed for helping me out here for this first session, for the third and final day of this 19th Bangkok International Symposium on HIV medicine. Now, to wrap things up, Professor David Cooper, he talked about antiretroviral therapy as a modern medical miracle. Now, we are going to be focusing on that, ART. We've talked about it a lot, but for our next segment, we are going to find out how it works in real life practice. So we'll be having the experts come here and tell us about ART in real life practice, and join us for the session that will begin at 12 noon after the experts share their information and their presentation inside the conference room, and then we'll bring them to the spotlight over here. So for now, thank you very much, Professor Praphan Phanuphak, Director of the Thai Red Cross AIDS Research Centre. Thank you.
Thank you
I
very
hope
much.
to see you back later
Okay.
on.
I hope not.
He
because
hopes
someone
not.
else will
Well,
take care of it.
I
Yeah.
hope so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very
Thank you.
much indeed. And thank you very much to all of you for joining us. Don't forget to join us again at 12, talking about ART, real life practice. For now, I'm Kachari.